The minivan pulled away with a screech of tires and a cacophony of shouts, leaving a plume of exhaust and a ringing silence in its wake. 12-year-old Kevin McCallister stood on the porch, a half-eaten bag of cheese puffs in his hand, and watched them go. He was alone. Truly alone. It wasn't the being alone part that bothered him, not really. It was the way they had left. A whirlwind of frantic packing, misplaced passports, and securing matches had culminated in a mad dash to the airport, leaving Kevin once again as an afterthought. This time, however, it wasn't just a head count error. This time, it felt different. Cruel, almost. "They'll be back," he muttered to himself, more out of habit than conviction. He'd been through this drill before. But the words felt hollow, even to him. The house loomed behind him, a 2-story colonial that suddenly seemed vast and unfamiliar. It wasn't just empty, it was void. The usual comforting hum of family life, the drone of the TV, the clatter of dishes, the bickering of siblings, was gone, replaced by an unnerving stillness that pressed in on him like a physical weight. He pushed open the front door, the click of the latch echoing through the silent house. The air inside was stale, tinged with the lingering scent of burnt coffee and his mom's overly sweet perfume. It was a smell that usually meant home, but now it just felt wrong. Kevin wandered through the empty rooms, the silence amplifying every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains in the draft. He felt a strange sense of displacement, as if he were a trespasser in his own home. Everything looked the same, yet felt subtly different, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting. He tried to distract himself. He raided the fridge, gorged on junk food, and watched cartoons at a volume that would have normally earned him a reprimand. But the usual joy he found in these solitary indulgences was absent. A gnawing unease had settled in his stomach, a feeling that had nothing to do with the excessive sugar intake. As dusk began to creep through the windows, painting the rooms in long, distorted shadows, the unsettling feeling intensified. Kevin found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, his senses on high alert. He started to hear things, faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone pacing in the attic above. The almost inaudible sound of breathing just behind him. He dismissed them as tricks of the light, the settling of the old house, the overactive imagination of a kid left alone for too long. But deep down, a sliver of fear, cold and sharp, had lodged itself in his heart. It whispered that maybe this was not normal. One evening, while rummaging through his dad's pre-ticked office, Kevin found an old, leather-bound journal tucked away in the back of a drawer. It was filled with strange symbols and diagrams, interspersed with frantic, barely legible handwriting. He couldn't understand most of it, but the few phrases he could decipher sent a chill down his spine. "They're always watching. The house remembers, and don't let them in." He slammed the journal shut, his heart pounding in his chest. What was this? Was his dad involved in something dangerous? Or was it just some elaborate prank, a leftover prop from one of Buzz's twisted games? He began to believe his dad was involved in something. That night, sleep evaded him. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind outside his window sounded like footsteps approaching, like voices murmuring his name. He lay in bed, clutching his Buzz Lightyear action figure, a childish comfort he hadn't needed in years, and stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He started to see things in the darkness, shapes that shifted and danced in the periphery of his vision, shadows that stretched and contorted into monstrous forms. He told himself it was just his imagination, but the fear was a living thing now, a cold, clammy hand gripping his heart. He was not imagining it. One morning, he woke to find a single word scrawled on the bathroom mirror in what looked like dried blood: "Leave." He recoiled in horror, scrubbing at the message until his fingers were raw and the mirror was spotless. But the word remained, burned into his memory. He was terrified. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had written it himself in some sort of sleepwalking fugue state. Maybe it was a prank, a cruel joke played by one of his siblings before they left. But deep down, he knew the truth. He began to cry. He wasn't alone in the house, and whatever was with him wanted him gone. It had made its first move. Days turned into a blur of mounting terror. The subtle disturbances escalated. Objects moved on their own with increasing frequency, no longer just misplaced, but rearranged in disturbing patterns. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, sometimes forming his name, sometimes forming other more menacing words. One evening, while watching TV, the screen suddenly filled with static, then resolved into an image that made his blood run cold. It was his house, seen from the outside, but it was different. Darker, more menacing. And in one of the windows, a shadowy figure stood, watching. He scrambled for the remote, frantically changing channels, but the image persisted. He unplugged the TV, but the image remained, burned into the screen. A silent, terrifying accusation. It was burned into his mind. He was trapped in a waking nightmare, a prisoner in his own home. The once familiar surroundings had become a labyrinth of fear, every shadow a potential hiding place, every sound a potential threat. He tried calling his parents, but the phone line was dead. Not just dead, but emitting a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the receiver and into his bones. He tried the internet, but the connection was gone, the modem blinking with an eerie, malevolent red light. He was cut off. He was utterly and completely alone. One night, driven to the edge of desperation, Kevin decided to take action. He couldn't just cower in fear, waiting for whatever was in the house to make its next move. He had to fight back. He had to protect himself. He gathered every item he could find that could be used as a weapon. Baseball bats, golf clubs, kitchen knives, even his old rusty BB gun. He barricaded his bedroom door, piling furniture against it, creating a makeshift fortress against the unseen enemy. He was ready, or as ready as he could be, to face whatever was lurking in the shadows of his home. He was terrified, but he was also angry. Angry at his family for leaving him, angry at whatever was tormenting him, and angry at himself for being so scared. As he sat there in the darkness, clutching a baseball bat like a lifeline, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a slow, deliberate creak, coming from the hallway outside his room. Then another and another, each one closer than the last. Something was coming. He gripped the bat tighter, his knuckles white, his breath catching in his throat. He could hear his own heart pounding in his ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the house. The doorknob rattled. Then a voice, soft and sure, whispered through the keyhole. "Kevin," it said, "we know you're in there. Come out, Kevin. We just want to play. We love you." The whispers slithered into the room, worming their way into his mind, icy tendrils of dread coiling around his heart. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The voices were inside his head now, whispering, cajoling, threatening. He was trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The doorknob rattled again, more insistently this time. The hinges creaked, the wood groaned under some unseen pressure. The barricade wouldn't hold for long. Kevin raised the baseball bat, his arms trembling, his eyes wide with terror. He was home alone, but he wasn't alone. To be continued.